So WoW Remix Mists of Pandaria is currently on the PTR, and having gone through it and been able to test quite a bit of this mode, I can say that the gearing and progression in this is very interesting and has some ridiculous combinations that basically all seem just built around having fun. Even if they're crazy overpowered or some of the combinations are completely broken, they all seem to just be built around the idea of just having fun and making your character and your build ridiculously overpowered. Now, if you've heard nothing about this mode, you're basically playing through the entirety of the Mists of Pandaria expansion, but all of the gear is different, and you're going to have a bunch of these spell gem slots in all of your gear that do different things, and you're going to have different types of gems giving you active abilities and a bunch of crazy effects, and then you'll be able to infinitely scale your power over time through the cloak that you get and through just being able to upgrade your gear ridiculously high. I think the gear item cap is like 556 or something, so you're going to have some pretty ridiculous stats. Now, as you see, I'm currently level 58 and I still don't have a necklace or rings or trinkets, and that is intentional. You'll get your necklace, your rings, and your trinkets later on. You actually do get them from achievements, so once you get into the end game and start doing end game content, you'll complete those achievements and those will give you those items. And all the items I currently don't have seem to be items that have prismatic gems in them, which are just stat increases. Now, the prismatic gem system is actually pretty interesting as well. So you basically have every stat you can think of. You have speed, leech, mastery, crit, haste, all of the stats you could think of, you have gems for, and you start at base gems that just give 1+ to that stat. And then when you get 3 of those gems, you right click them, it upgrades into the next rarity. So up to rare, up to epic, and then up to legendary. And legendary gems will also give you some additional stamina on top of that. And a handful of the different items will have those as gems. As you level up and get higher item levels, you'll have more gem slots for all of your pieces of gear as well. And that's also another pretty interesting piece of this. A good chunk of your stats are actually coming from these gems, especially once you get the rings, trinkets, and necklace. So you actually have a good amount of control over statting in that way. But where the really interesting parts come in is all of your other gems. So first off, in your helmet, you have a meta gem. Now, it doesn't seem like you're going to be getting more than one meta gem, but meta gems are all active abilities. So for instance, I'm tank right now and I have the bulwark of the Black Ox. So basically what this does is every 3 minutes, which all of the meta gems share a 3-minute cooldown, I can transform into the bulwark of the Black Ox for 10 seconds. It charges me to an enemy, removes all stuns and roots. I gain a shield absorbing quite a lot of damage. I taunt all enemies within 20 yards, and then every 1 second for 10 seconds, I deal a ton of AoE physical damage to all enemies within 20 yards. So it's just basically a massive cooldown, and I'm almost thinking of these meta gems as like an ultimate ability, kind of something similar to like a MOBA where you have one ability that's your ultimate that's generally going to be incredibly strong, especially if you use it in the correct situations. And there is a bunch of different meta gems. Like you have Tireless Spirit, which when you use it, it gives all of your party members a resource cost reduction on all abilities by 100% for 5 seconds, so nothing costs any resources. We have a really interesting one, which is Shiji the Red Crane. You turn into Shiji for 30 seconds and you gain a whole slew of new abilities that all deal damage and heal. You have something like Life Storm, which calls down a bunch of lightning strikes dealing damage. Then it spawns 3 big flowers that people can stand in for a bunch of healing, and it gives them haste buffs. You even have something that sounds pretty bad off the bat, but this can be ridiculous when combined with some other gems in this mode. And this is Soul Tether. You tether your soul to an ally for 1 hour, redirecting 20% of the damage they take to you as shadow damage. This can be used on 5 allies, but like mentioned, if combined with some other effects, this could actually be really strong for damage dealing, healing, or just keeping your allies alive. So meta gems are pretty important. They're basically an ultimate on a 3-minute cooldown. And then you have Boots, which is your other active ability, and this is going to give you a utility skill. I currently have Sprint. It's literally just Rogue Sprint, 1-minute cooldown for 70% speed increase for 8 seconds. But you have a ton of other effects. These are also the cogwheel gems, and it also seems like you only get one of these as well. They probably didn't want you having too many new cooldowns you need to use, but you could get Trailblazer that increases your movement speed while not being attacked for 3 seconds. You have Dark Pact to sacrifice a bunch of your health to give you a massive shield. You have Wild Charge, so you jump to a nearby ally's position. You even have stuff like Roll, so you just get Roll from a monk. So basically all utility skills, but this is the other gem that's an actual usable ability you need to put on a keybind. Now, past your meta gem and your cogs wheel gem, everything else are going to be Tinker Gems. Now these are pretty strong effects, but they're all passive. So you don't actually have to use any new abilities, but you can get some ridiculous combinations of these and they're just kind of incredibly cool. And in a similar way to the prismatic gems that just give you stats, your gear with Tinker Gem slots in them, you continue to get more and more. So currently my gear has 3 Tinker slots in most of the gear I have. So as you can imagine, stacking up a ton of cool strong effects can get pretty ridiculous. Now some of these Tinker Gems are just absolutely ridiculous right now, like Blood DKs are doing the most healing and by far the most damage in this mode right now. They'll probably need to be nerfed, but there's just some combinations of stuff. Like one of the Tinker Gems, the healing you do, you can blow up to deal damage to enemies, which is pretty much how Blood DKs are doing the most damage. Then you even have gems that are really good, like Vindication, which 10% of your damage is collected as Vindication. Every 3 seconds, that Vindication is consumed to heal up to 3 allies within 50 yards for the amount consumed. So if you're dealing a crazy amount of damage, every 3 seconds, you'll be doing massive heals. But then you have crazy combinations. So for instance, you have Slay, which when you attack an enemy beneath 10% health, you attempt to slay them, inflicting shadow damage equal to 100% of your max health. I have 50k max health right now, so when I attack an enemy below 10%, it pretty much just always executes them for like 50,000 damage, and this has no cooldown when it's on different targets. So in AoE situations, you can just mass execute tons of enemies doing ridiculous amounts of damage, but you can combine this with some other things. For instance, we have Victory Fire. Slaying an enemy causes you to erupt, inflicting fire damage and restoring health to allies within 12 yards. So you have Slay that executes, then you have a Victory Fire that when that enemy dies, it does a big burst of damage and healing. But then we have the really big combination. We have Brittle. Your abilities apply Brittle to enemies, accruing 10% of damage you deal. When a Brittle enemy is slain, it explodes, inflicting frost damage to enemies within 12 yards. So basically how this combination goes is you have Slay, you have Brittle, and you have Victory Fire. Victory Fire isn't necessary, but it does help out this combination. So basically you're in an AoE situation, you're doing tons of AoE damage. Once those enemies all start to get low, because they'll usually get low at the same time, you start to execute them all, dealing massive amounts of damage because it's 100% of your life as the execute. Then that's mixed in with Brittle, so it adds all of that damage you've been dealing to them, including the execute damage. And then when that enemy dies and gets executed, it blows up the Brittle, dealing all of that damage to all nearby enemies. And then if those enemies say survive, or even if they don't, if they just got hit by that Brittle damage, it would still add that to the Brittle damage of all of the other enemies, meaning this massive AoE burst you just did from one enemy will stack up the Brittle on other enemies, and they can all explode basically at the same time, pretty much insta-killing everything. In fact, the first raid boss of Miss Pandaria in Mogushan Vault, there are massive packs of trash in the same room as a boss. So what everybody's doing right now is you have this Brittle effect, you group up all those trash mobs with the bosses, and then you all AoE everything down, and then Brittle procs on something when it gets low, it hits everything else, and then everything's Brittle blows up, and you can pretty much insta-kill these bosses with all of these packs of enemies just because of this combination of Brittle and some other effects. So there's just some absurd combinations with these Tinker Gems. And another one I've actually been thinking about trying is, first we have the Memory of Vengeance, which every 10 seconds you gain 1% strength for every 5% health you've lost. So if you think about being a tank, over a 10-second period in combat, you could lose your entire health bar multiple times. So this will just give you massively increased strength or other main stats, and this is a percentage increase. But then you have something like the Meta Gem, which is Funeral Pyre, grants a caster strength for 1 second. Every 1 second you gain a stack of Funeral Pyre, suffering fire damage per stack. So now you have a bunch of flat strength, you have a bunch of stacking percentage strength, and because you're taking fire damage from this Funeral Pyre, you're also going to be getting more percent strength increase. Then you can also do things like add in the Fervor Tinker Gem, which while you are above 80% health, your attacks consume 2% of your max health to inflict holy damage equal to the amount consumed. So now when you're high health, you're constantly losing percentage of your health and dealing that health you're losing as holy damage. So if you can imagine doing like a full stamina build to get a ridiculous amount of health, which you could do. I'm not doing that right now, but I could probably double my health right now pretty easily. And then you're dealing a ton of damage based off having even more health, but then you're also getting a ton more strength based off of the percentage of health you're losing. And then having just more health will allow you to stay alive longer, get more strength stacked up, giving you more fervor, giving you more damage on top of that. There's just some ridiculous combinations you can do mixing in all of these different types of gems. And one of the main reasons I want to go over these systems is because outside of a lot of these gems being really unbalanced, and I think that's kind of the point of some of these, is that this event is kind of supposed to allow you to be really strong and unbalanced. These systems are actually just really interesting and well made. Like if you could imagine in, let's say, any MMO having a system like this where your gear actually has all of these different effects you could constantly change out and add different combinations to, but imagine these effects are much more toned down and actually balanced, so it's in a fully balanced MMO. Taking all of that into account, a system like this could just be really good for a customization and combat system of an MMO. A system like this could actually work pretty well in normal retail World of Warcraft if it was balanced. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.